You make a start if you like.
Okay, good to be in Oxford. Good to be at this conference. And really great to be part of the celebrations of 40 years of the Joint Centre for Urban Design. It's particularly poignant for me because I was one of the very earliest students to go through that course when it was the good old Oxford Polytechnic. In fact, I did it in 1974-75. Is anybody in the room who went through the course before that? I was delighted to see that Brian Goody was on the list of delegates. He was my mentor, one of my mentors there, a key guy, great guy at that time. And a fellow student was a certain Ian Bentley in my year. I don't know what happened to him, but I did a few things. I went into local government. I'm sure Ian didn't. And therefore, I've spent nearly 40 years in urban design and in the world of planning and local government, which, as we know, is overseen by politicians. So quite rightly at this conference, you've been talking about the economics of urban design. Absolutely critical. We do need to understand that better, particularly in these challenging times. But the other dimension that's always in play as to whether urban design prospers or not is the political climate it's operating within. And I know a little bit about that after so many years working with politicians in a wide range of authorities. So I'm going to share some reflections on what I have picked up over those years, what I think were key points, and perhaps some pointers for the way forward and how to work and continue to work with politicians in a way that will allow urban design to be practiced and to prosper. I'm going to start, first of all, with a cautionary tale. This is my only slide. If you're pleased to hear, an optimistic one. It is of a burning building. Now, all sorts of things are going into your mind now as to what I'm going to be talking about. On the 9th of July, 1984, a fire broke out in the south transept of York Minster. Now, this is York Minster. It was a devastating fire, and the roof was completely destroyed. So what's the point of this slide? Well, when it came to repair that roof, the Archbishop of York said that the replacement oak frame roof had to last for at least 500 years. And why did he say that? He said that because he knew there would be times in the future where society would not value, cherish and care for its historic buildings as it did then. And he wanted that building to survive the highs and lows, the good times and the bad times, the potential neglect in the future, so that it would have a long-term future. I think keep that thought in the back of our minds, because that's the only slide you're going to see. So you're going to have to listen to me now. Let me take you back to those early days. When I did urban design in the mid-70s, hardly anybody had heard of it, even fewer knew what it meant. There was no language, no understanding of such an activity as placemaking, particularly in local government. There were some good examples, mainly abroad, but not a lot of practice going on in this country. So I think it's fair to describe those early years as missionary work, and particularly working with highway authorities, but also the planning profession, either not understanding or actually actively resistant to the whole idea. It's not what planning was meant to be. And I'm old enough to remember the infamous Circular 2280. Anybody else remember Circular 2280? Well done. You're a young audience, obviously, yeah. That actually came out from the Conservative government in 1980. It was Circular number 22. That's why it was called Circular 2280. And it was known as that because it actually said that design was mainly a matter of aesthetics, which is of no concern to the planning authority. And it was at the time of free market economics, and let anything rip anywhere. Good old Nicholas Edwards, the Secretary of State, at one time did a huge amount of damage to what those of us in this room would firmly believe in as the right way of planning places. But actually, urban designers, since those early days, which if you're not my age, you have the pleasure of not remembering, but you'll have seen the legacy of those days. But it's now prospered. I always say that urban design took 30 years to become an overnight success. And it's... but if we look back at certainly the political side of things, why did it prosper? Why did it go from the most dreadful days in the early 80s to what it has been particularly in recent years? And I think there are lots of conditions for success, but I'd like to just draw out two. The first one is that you actually needed robust theory and practice, which would then be translated into a language that people could understand. And that's the key. Urban design, first of all, did need robust theory and practice, and then it needed to be translated in a language that politicians and planners and local communities could actually understand what this was all about, and it actually would mean something to them. And there were one or two landmarks in the story of what made these changes happen. And a key one was producing responsive environments in 1985, which for the first time set down in one document a whole story and theory and practice and principles around what makes good places and how you can actually go about designing them. What was still limited in those days was practice, was good practice. But at least we had the theory and the language. Although whenever I talk to politicians, indeed fellow planners, I would never use the words permeability and legibility. Keep that just for us within the profession. But also, at that time in the late 80s, the political climate changed. And there are three things, in my experience, that generally influence political thinking. One is global events that have to be responded to, the global situation, and that's pretty relevant today. Then there's the local condition, and particularly what communities are saying and feeling and expressing back up from the bottom to politicians. And the third is unforeseeable one-off events. It's well understood that a one-off unpredicted event can have a major impact on political thinking. It was never planned, but it still has a significance. And it's difficult to plan for those things by definition, and you just have to deal with them when they arise. And the global pressure at that time was coming around the issue about environmental sustainability. We had the Brundtland Report, and in particular we had the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. That was significant because although the drive for it may not have come from Britain, it certainly came from other places, and Britain felt it needed to be a part of that, and certainly attended. And it was one of the government's responses to that led to the production of, under John Selwyn Gummer's watch, This Common Inheritance in 1996. Now, not often referred to these days, but it was significant in that it was a U-turn in government thinking. Because what it combined were two concerns, which resonated with the government, the changing mood of the government at that time. One was the need for more sustainable practice, and actually the emerging urban design theory actually led to more sustainable design. And the second point of that pressure that was coming is there was, having built up a legacy of the free market developments in the 80s, people saw what it looked like. They saw declining town and city centres, they saw declining high street, they saw the expansion of large faceless shed developments on the edge of town, and they didn't like what was happening. They liked the facilities, but they didn't like the impact on particularly the urban environment and on the edge of town environment. So there was a bottom-up concern and a top-down global concern about sustainability. So the mood changed. Before this common inheritance ever had a chance to have a real influence, there was a general election in '97, which brought in a new Labour government, and John Prescott came in as Secretary of State, and he picked up that mantle from John Selwyn, but ran with it in a much more forceful and expanded way, with a much bigger focus on our cities, particularly our major cities, and regeneration. And that led to towards an urban renaissance. Lord Rogers' report in '98. So you can see how the politics and the world events were shaping the changing agenda, which then led to things like K being set up, much more supportive planning policies. Fortunately, the economy was picking up, so there was a lot more investment going on, and a huge amount of money being put into urban regeneration, which is a political decision. So all of a sudden, there were mechanisms, policies, and indeed activity on the ground at a time when urban design theory was now widely accepted as the right way of doing things, and which led to a proliferation of urban villages, sustainable urban extensions, and major urban regeneration schemes like we've seen in Manchester city centre. So over the 90s and the beginning of this century, a huge amount of what we've been talking about as principles and ideas was now being put into place all over the country. Everybody saw what urban design-based places were going to look like, and they were actually using them, perhaps for the first time. So it looked as if perhaps everything was perfect. But I think the wheel has turned again, and the reason this conference has the topic it has, because people have recognised that things have moved on. There's more uncertainty again, there's more questioning and challenges. There's three factors I would particularly draw attention to. The obvious one, which has been a major feature of this conference, is the changing economic climate, which means less investment and people looking to spend less and get more value for money. And there is still the major problem with whenever you talk about quality in the built environment, there is still the association that that means more expensive. And therefore, in times of economic hardship, that's a nice thing to do, but we will drop it. And I think that is something really has to be challenged. So how do you do urban design? It actually is cheaper and creates more wealth. It is absolutely spot on in terms of where we need to be to challenge that. The second one, I think, is that the urban design industry got complacent. I think we saw an increasing blandness in the product. What started off as a theory of analysing places became a pattern book of solutions. I don't know if it's just me, but over recent years, every time I open planning or urban design quarterly and I looked at a major development, there would be a master plan there. Always a master plan. And it seems to me it's the same person who drew up every single one of them. It's just me, I don't know. But they all look the same. So while we have now learnt how to create places rather than a collection of buildings, what we are increasingly doing is designing places that all look the same. And that's not what urban design was ever meant to be about. And the third problem area we've got is that now that there's a huge amount of urban design out there for people to explore and use, we're getting some feedback. And as you've heard earlier, they don't like all of it. You'll have read probably about Kent County Council's recent research into how users of the housing schemes we've talked about, what their feelings are. And there's quite a lot of resistance, perhaps not surprisingly, to the higher densities, the limited car parking provision, which keeps coming up, and therefore applying suburbanist solutions to suburban housing is not quite working for a lot of people. And they're thinking about changing or reviewing their design standards to reflect what people are saying. And don't forget, what communities are saying is what politicians listen to. And at the end of the day, they will determine local authority policy. So how do we respond to those three challenges that are kicking into what was previously the cosy world of the urban designer, as I saw it? I think go back to what I said earlier was the two conditions of success in going forward. One is around having robust theory and practice. So keep refreshing the theory. And that's what a lot of you in this audience are doing, have been doing, but that needs to get out there a lot more into practice. In terms of what work, now that we've got a body of work out there, what doesn't work? What are the users' views? What are they telling us about what it's like to be there? What are the economics of these places? And the changing world around us that we now have to respond to. We have to retain that link, though, with sustainability. Because regardless of the economic circumstances, environmental sustainability is still a major issue and getting a bigger issue. It won't go away. A lot of people would like it to go away, but it won't go away. And I think that link is something that we've got to maintain and build on, as we've heard from other speakers. And the second part is the political climate. How do we influence that? Where are the areas that we can actually make most difference? Nationally, I think the government is very ambivalent about this whole agenda. There's some very positive statements about design being at the heart of the planning system in the NPPF, which is very welcome. So having then put design right at the heart of planning, they now go on to rubbish planning as being an activity that's largely getting in the way of economic prosperity and should be restrained. So it's not necessarily the best place to be. CABE, major Quango, that was employing, I think, over 100 people at one time at its peak, and now employing less than 20. And from next March, will have to be entirely self-funding. And, as you know, merged with the Design Council. So what does that say about national commitment to high-quality design? Still doing a great job, still working hard to stay in business, still there, still very active, a lot of good stuff, but being much more homed in on making a bigger difference with less resources. I think nationally it's a bit tricky. Locally, I think everything is there to play for. I think that's offers the greatest opportunity. As we know, local government in particular, their biggest worry is how to deliver services, quality services, with less and less money every year. And that's not going to change. So the whole issue around value for money is absolutely top of their agenda, which is why this conference is so important. In specific areas of particularly planning work, which I think the urban designer can still make a major difference. The first is the local development plans. We still have to produce them by law, and they still need to be there. As part of the work I've been doing with Kay, I've been doing reviews of a number of LDFs as they have been coming through the system. And one of the things that we're trying to get local authorities to do as part of the LDF is use that document to tell the story of that place. What's unique about that place, and where does it want to go? Where does it want to be? And what we're finding is that it's there. Huge amount of local knowledge and understanding and vision, but it's lost in 250 pages of policies, maps, diagrams, words, shopping lists of things they'd like to aspire to. It doesn't come out. So I think there's a great role for urban designers to work with local politicians and local community and say, because one thing about local government is that each authority is very competitive. It wants to be successful, and it wants to get one up on its neighbouring authorities and its competitors. They see other authorities often as competitors, particularly for scarce resources. So they really care about their place. And I think that can be worked with and the local community in telling a story of that place. And urban designers are well placed to help articulate that story. The second is the same activity, but at a much smaller scale. It's been mentioned earlier, neighbourhood planning. Again, apart from the concern I have as where the resource is going to come from to actually carry out all this neighbourhood planning, put that to one side. Wherever it is taking place, great opportunity to work with much smaller communities who know their place very well to really shape the future of that community. And again, urban designers should be in there working on those to help those people take some control and influence over the shape of that place. And they need urban designers to help them do that. And I think that was obviously good for urban designers because it's doing what we do best, is actually working with communities, not imposing a theory we picked up in a book we read or some place we saw in South America. The last point I want to make in terms of a part of local government that I think should change, and maybe not everybody would agree with this, is that I think we have to change our relationship, the planning authorities, with the major house builders. And I think for most of us outside London, there's probably 3 major house builders that we're working with, and they tend to turn up the same stuff everywhere. And I think it's also fair to say that the relationship between planning authorities, urban designers and house builders over the last 30 years has been a war of attrition. And I think that should end. I think there is common ground. You'll have heard some of it from the previous speaker and others. There is common ground with people who are trying to build houses for people to live in. And we can have the big debate about whether you should be building on the edge of town or in the middle of town, but edge of town suburban housing is going to happen. So I think where it is going to happen, there must be a much better relationship between the two, and reinvent that and grow in more common cause. So I'll leave you with 2 thoughts. 1, carry on adapting to the changing world, because if we don't adapt, the whole thing dies. And secondly, stay robust. Stay totally committed to the concept of the places matter. And that while we adapt and change to the world, that the essence of what makes good places comes out in what we do. And not only that, they will still be good places in 500 years' time. Thank you.